What does the burning bush of the Exodus have to do with the tribulation? Well, actually, much more than you think. Sometimes, we have to turn aside from our mundane lives in order to recognize the extraordinary is happening right in front of us. That's what took place with Moses and the burning bush, and it may be what's happening right now with the tribulation in our world. Think about it. Moses initially encountered the burning bush, kind of an unusual, inexplicable phenomenon in the natural world. A bush that was burning but was not consumed. Moses decided to investigate, and that decision set the stage for his life-changing encounter with God. He wouldn't have been the great prophet of Israel if he didn't say, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Exodus 3:3. His curiosity led him to step closer, and only then did God call out to him from the bush and reveal his presence. Not until he drew close. Moses could have ignored that burning bush, He could have just dismissed it as kind of strange, but just an inconsequential phenomenon. Instead, he chose to investigate, demonstrated a readiness to engage with the supernatural. This openness was the critical step that allowed him to receive God's revelation and blessing. This may be where you and I are today. Many people during the tribulation may initially dismiss the calamities and major events as random or scientifically explainable. However, the magnitude and sequence of events as described in prophecy are designed to draw the attention of people to God's power and his plan and draw people into his presence. However, there will be those who never do. Revelation 9:20-21 may be the ultimate example. After people who are left on earth at that point experience the horror of 5 months of stinging from demonic locusts of the fifth trumpet, and then the falling of fire and brimstone that kills like a third of all humans on earth, sixth trumpet, this passage, Revelation 9:20-21, describes how some will refuse to repent or acknowledge God despite the plagues and the judgment. These individuals represent those who, unlike Moses, failed to turn aside and recognize the divine in the midst of extraordinary events. So like Moses, individuals in the tribulation will need to turn aside from their routine understanding of the world to acknowledge the hand of God in unprecedented events. The tribulation is going to serve as a wake-up call, prompting many to question the meaning behind the chaos. Some will wake up earlier than others, but everyone going through the tribulation will eventually need to wake up to reality in order to be saved. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and I call these burning bush moments. When a person realizes something divine may be taking place and turns aside to study the event. And when they do, God reveals himself to them, and he calls them to join in his plan. If that hasn't happened this year, then it is going to in the next several, and everybody should be preparing, because every single person entering into the tribulation will have a number of potential burning bush moments. Some will wake up at the first seal, some at the second, some at the third, etc. But the longer it takes to recognize the tribulation is here, the more dangerous it will become. Of course, to that I always hear, hey, I'm going in a pre-trib rapture, and I'm not going to argue for or against pre-trib in this video, but let's say, for the sake of argument's sake, that there is a pre-trib rapture. According to Jesus himself, only a very few churchgoers, though, will be taken in that rapture. Most will be left behind. Remember, Jesus said the gate is small and the way is narrow, which leads to life, and there are only a few who find it. Few is not the 2 billion self-professed Christians on earth, not even the 200 million self-professed Christians in the USA. Neither of those two things are few. And of course, then there is the very real chance that the rapture isn't pre-trib. So everyone should anticipate being present for some portion of a 70th week of Daniel. And everyone should plan on having a burning bush moment. Now, in the Gospels, in the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus called this burning bush moment the midnight cry. Prior to the cry, all the virgins are asleep. But after they hear the cry, they wake up and they begin lighting their lamps, which signifies testifying that Jesus is coming back soon. So there's a moment when churchgoers who are anticipating the return of Jesus, the virgins, are all asleep. But then at some point, a cry is going to wake them up. So the parable of the 10 virgins and Moses' encounter with the burning bush both reveal the importance of seizing that critical spiritual moment. Both of these are prophetic analogies of the moment you learn God is doing something major on earth in a prophetic way. Now, God did not reveal himself to Moses until Moses acted. We need to pay attention to that too. Only after Moses turned aside to examine the burning bush did God speak, calling him by name and beginning the process of revelation. This demonstrates the divine revelation requires our human attention and willingness to engage. If Moses didn't engage, he would have missed the opportunity. Similarly, in the tribulation, God will use extraordinary events to grab human attention. Understanding the meaning of those events and responding to God will only come to those who turn their focus towards him. Now, this concept aligns with Jesus' words in Luke 21:25-28, where he speaks of signs in the heavens and on earth that will cause fear and confusion. Jesus exhorts his followers, though, to lift up your heads because your redemption is drawing near. This lifting of the head is kind of akin to turning aside as well, akin to hearing the midnight cry, choosing to recognize that God is active in the midst of this chaos and doing it for a purpose. Many will only fully realize, that they're in the tribulation after they examine the signs and compare them to biblical prophecy. Just as Moses had to leave the routine of shepherding to investigate the burning bush, people are going to need to step outside of their natural assumptions and seek spiritual truth. Let me say this again because it's very important. Just as Moses had to leave the routine of his shepherding to turn aside and investigate the burning bush, people are going to need to step outside of their natural, everyday assumptions that they've always had and seek spiritual truth in the tribulation when they see something extraordinary. This is exactly where we are today. On this channel, we have presented the theory that the tribulation may have begun on October 2nd and 3rd of this year, on the Feast of Trumpets. The Pact for the Future was approved by the United Nations, and it may be the covenant of Daniel 9:27. After all, it is the greatest secular covenant of all time, of all history, from before the days of Moses. Never was there a secular covenant like this one. And then, just a couple days later, on October 3rd, a 90-nation alliance was formed to force the two-state solution on Israel. And is this the group strengthening the covenant or enforcing the covenant, as Daniel 9:27 says? This group is still working on attempting to force that to happen. They just met the other day. So this isn't over yet. However, the only way you will know or not know is to turn aside and investigate the theory. Why this is important is God's call on your life happens in the midst of your burning bush moment. After Moses turned aside, God called to him personally, Moses, Moses. Exodus 3:4. This direct call marked the beginning of his divine encounter where Moses received his mission and understood his role in God's plan. This call is similar to the midnight cry of the 10 virgins. They began to take action after they heard the cry. Now, for Moses, turning aside to investigate the burning bush, it completely transformed his life. He encountered God, he received his mission, and he became the deliverer of Israel. This moment of engagement was the beginning of his role in a larger divine plan. Those who turn aside during the tribulation, recognizing the signs, and then seeking God will similarly have their lives transformed. I think inside we all want that. They will move from fear into faith and from confusion into purpose. It is no coincidence to us that immediately after we became convinced that the tribulation had begun, that we were given missions from the Lord. Dr. Steve Taylor and I recorded a flash drive just this week that's going to be used to explain the evidence that the tribulation may have started in the fall of this year. These flash drives will soon be available for you to share with your family, friends, small groups, the elders in your church, your pastors, Sunday school classes, etc. The website where you can get them will be nelsonflashdrives.com. You should also listen for God's voice regarding Israel. When God revealed himself at the burning bush, he identified himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Exodus 3:6. This statement kind of reaffirmed his covenant with the patriarchs and his enduring commitment to the nation of Israel. The burning bush underscores God's faithfulness to his covenant. Despite Israel's disobedience, God remembered his promise to deliver them from Egypt. Similarly, during the tribulation, God will remember his covenant and act to restore Israel and his chosen people again. And it's going to culminate in their recognition of Jesus as Messiah, Zechariah 12:10 and Romans 11:26. So all of us need to listen closely to God's call to assist the Israelis. Now, we're not talking politically, but spiritually. In a brand new fictional book, my first ever fictional book, by the way, that I'm in the process of finishing up with co-writer Jason Lawrence, the small church at the center of the story receives a call to warn everyone in Israel to flee when the abomination of desolation takes place. Think about that call. When that little church thinks about it, they realize that as Christians, we know everyone in Judea needs to flee to the mountains when that happens, Matthew 24:16. But the Jews neither believe that gospel is truth, nor would they ever trust Christians who told them to do it. Plus, warning Israel will probably cost something like $30 million. Now, I'm not going to spoil what happens in that book because it's pretty amazing. But that call that little church received is a very legitimate call to warn Israel so the remnant does flee when the time is appropriate. Maybe that's a legitimate call for all of us on the Nelson channel that are awake to the reality that the tribulation may have begun and that we only have 3.5 years left to warn Israel. That would make it a very legitimate call. But of course, maybe you're saying, Nelson, what are you, crazy? We could never do that. Well, just to remind you, in the burning bush account, Moses thinks his call from God to save Israel is impossible. Moses expressed self-doubt. Exodus 3:11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? He felt he lacked authority. Exodus 3:13, what if they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? He was concerned about fear of rejection. Exodus 4:1, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? He worried about his personal limitations. Exodus 4:10, I am slow of speech and tongue. Finally, in Exodus 4:13, he just pleaded, hey, please somebody else. That sounds like us, doesn't it? The tribulation period, is going to test the courage and faith of believers. Christians may face reluctance in fulfilling their call to witness, endure persecution, and still remain faithful in the face of incredible tasks. But God is going to answer those questions that we have, just like he answered Moses' questions. But it all begins. It all begins with knowing that the tribulation has begun. Your burning bush moment, until you have your burning bush moment or midnight cry, you aren't part of the game plan. In Jesus' words, you're sleeping, just as he referred to the virgins. And don't think this is just regular folks who are asleep. You would be surprised how many major end-time scholars I've contacted about this, who normally interchange with me all the time, but not about this. Unwilling to draw near, passing by what may be their burning bush. At least you would think they would look at it. But if you want to learn about this for yourself, you probably have questions. We have a video where we answer the 8 toughest questions we've received about the tribulation starting. Click right here to keep watching and see, where is the Antichrist in all of this? Why haven't crazy, violent tribulation things started? Etc., etc. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there, and maybe it will be your burning bush moment.